Hey, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to the Writer's Bookshelf. So today we're going to continue our series on characters. If you've been keeping up with us so far, you know that we've already dealt with the archetypes of characters, which I think is an important part of learning how to do character construction, because you need to have a foundation on which to build from. But the only thing with character archetypes is at some point you got to actually populate it with characters that are relatable and identifiable, and something that your reader will be familiar with, which means you're probably going to be going with something a little more either modern, mainstream, or even historical but familiar. Even something like a king or a knight is familiar to anyone who's read fantasy or seen a movie or two. But likewise, something from the future, something with maybe a robot droid going through and trying to learn how to become human. It's a pretty common trope that you might find not even in sci-fi, but in speculative fiction. And there's a number of ways in which we can approach a character, but we want to be able to see a character that we can identify with, because otherwise there's not much point reading. So examples of characters you might identify with that aren't necessarily even human include the characters of Animal Farm. There's just a bunch of rabbits, or that's Watership Down, but pigs and farm animals who are basically going through an uprising because they are dealing with a sociopolitical climate that is not conducive to their farm. And people who grew up in that during the war, and I'm actually not sure when it came out, but I think it was post-war fiction, in one of Orwell's classics. But it was based on characters who have four legs and fur, and they taught us something about how governments work, how different societies, when they come together, they have to go through certain rules in which to function. And of course, when the rules are broken, the system breaks down. And there's just a number of things that we can learn from that. And with characters, we find that it's not just the type of character we're dealing with, but it's the relatability that we, the reader, have to that. When we see something that we identify, something that we recognize. And when we go through the archetypes, what we're actually looking at is we're looking at the pieces of what a character is. But because we're not actually digging into who that character is, we haven't fully identified what that character yet. So what we're going to look at today is we're going to look at a book about actually finding out who your character is, finding out why your character is relevant to your reader, finding out why your character is relevant to your story. And I'll tell you that this is a book I just bought recently, because I didn't realize how important it was until I went and while I was researching for books to put on this series for this season. I went ahead and just looked it up to see if this is something I wanted to add, and it turned out it's not just important, but it's foundational, because the books I've following this one, they're a little more digging into nuanced elements of characters, whereas this one is about the overview. And so what we're looking at today is Creating Characters, and this is by the editors of the Writer's Digest. And this is actually one of several books that they curated. I'm going to do a couple more later in the season. But this one is what it is. It's a collection of essays and chapters from other books that are brought together in one complete unit. And it's actually a thick one. This one is over 300 pages. It's 330. It's actually how long my book ended up being. And the thing with this is, it's first of all, it's accessible because it's going to be dealing with essays not only from books like a couple that we're going to cover here in a little while, but articles from the magazine Writer's Digest, and it's also it covers basically the essentials of what makes a character important to write about. So what I'll do is I'm going to go cover some of the chapter basics here, so you can see what we're looking at, and go from there. Okay, sorry, I had to pause the video because I feel like my microphone is not positioned in the right spot, so I went ahead and reset my microphone. So if I sound a little different for the rest of the video, you'll know why. I was just getting a lot of cross traffic, and I feel like it's distracting. So anyway, let me continue where I left off. So the book we're covering today, Creating Characters, it is about creating characters, not only from scratch, but it's from getting expert advice from different authors that we may have covered in previous Writer's Bookshelves. Like Stephen James is actually the one who wrote the foreword, as you can see here. He's the one that did Story Turn Structure way back in season 1. And you have others in here. The one that we just covered last week, Victoria Lynn Schmidt, she's got an article in here. Larry Brooks has an article in here. There's a few others. I think Jessica Page Morrow, who is a writer we're going to be covering later in the very soon. Actually, I'm actually going to be recording that video today. Some couple of her chapters from the book I'm going to cover later are actually in this book. So it has it's a wide range of authors who you've either heard of because we covered it in previous episodes, or you will hear of them because they have books that I'll probably end up covering at some point in the next, either this season or next. But what's great about it is the articles that they publish in this book, they're easy to access. They're at the level that anyone can start. And because creating characters is the most important part of your novel, or even a short story, if you're doing a short story, then you definitely want to make sure that you have the right idea going into it. And so this is where I'm going to kind of tell you a little bit about my own personal struggles with character. One of the reasons why I wanted to start with character for this season, and it's because you need to. I mean, there's no story without a character. Because even if your character is non-human, like we demonstrated with robots and talking pigs, there's still a need for the reader to identify with their struggle, with the situation they're in, and that means you have to figure out what the struggle is. So one of the things I struggle with as a writer, and I'm going to be kind of really going through this more in our next book for next week, but one of my great struggles as a writer is coming up with character motivation. And I think it's because a lot of times I don't really know what my own motivation is in life, and I think a lot of authors probably struggle with that in some form or another. One of the problems of being a writer is you're stuck in your room or your office, wherever you're doing your writing, and you don't really communicate with people often. And even when you are out and about, I know we're not out and about in COVID as much as we used to, unless you live where I live, where there's no lockdowns. Then you have a little more freedom to move around. But even then, there's still some limits because the way we handle getting research in, observations and things, it's not quite the same as it used to be. So in the old ways, we might go out and observe people talking, see how they interact with each other, and kind of get some ideas about conflicts and other issues, by observation. And nowadays, we don't always have that opportunity, especially if you live in a place that's still under lockdown or under some kind of restriction. We're making that observations difficult. And so, because, and even in good times when we are able to do the observation, we're still listening and not really interacting. We're not still getting the experience that a lot of people who aren't writers, who are just, forced to go and talk to people, get to have. And I know, like, as a writer, one of my great frustrations is that I feel isolated many times. And so by being isolated, I don't often get to think about what I want. I don't get to think about other than, what I want is to finish the next story, which is kind of, for me, that's fine because I'm a writer, but from the perspective of grand, character desires, it's kind of lame. What I want, to finish my novel, actually what I want is some people to read my novel. But even then, it's like, there's no one's going to write a novel about reading a novel. So my motivation, my experiential motivation is a little on the weak side. And so I'll probably talk more about that in the next book. But the point being is that characters, they have to have a place that they come from, that we have to imagine. And if we don't have the imagination for developing characters, then our story will ultimately suffer. Doesn't matter how good our structure is, doesn't matter how good our idea is. If our character is lame, the reader is going to pick up on that pretty quickly. And so this is where I think we do need to adopt the skills that come from the experts who are sharing their advice. And so this book, Creating Characters, I think this is a foundational book for creating characters. I would even say it's probably more foundational than the two that we just covered, because what this does is this goes into the more modern take on what a character is, but it also it has 9 sections in the book that all break down important elements of character development. So I often like to show you guys what the books actually contain. So let me just show you quickly. When you're opening the book, all the curated books from Writer's Digest will have some kind of design like this. So this is the familiarity. It's, I think, really pleasant to read. It's kind of modern. It doesn't feel like it's something that was written a century ago, because it wasn't. But it just feels like it's the perfect writer book. Like if you're in a diner or coffee shop or whatever, it gets you in that mood. But more importantly, the articles that covers the character development. They're straightforward. Each one is about one thing. And then each article, because it's a curated text, it'll lead kind of into the next thing. So you're getting your foundational work. And I would even say you could probably build your story off of this book, off this one book. There's probably enough here for you to get going. My only caveat, and this is why I'm going to be covering other books on the topic, is that like everything else, the repetition is really what sells it. You're going to get your overview. This is kind of like your course in character development, but it's not going to necessarily be the practice or the deep dive. So if you do get this book, realize that, and you should, because again, it's foundational, but realize that you're going to be kind of introduced to the overview of developing character. It may not necessarily be all that you need to know. So I still think that there's going to be others you're going to want to help create a better, stronger character. But anyway, let me show you the table of contents here. There are, I think you can see, there are 9 parts. This is the first 2. I'm not going to show you all the parts, but what it's covering is it's covering getting started. So the very first chapter is by Chuck Wendig, and the title is called 25 Things You Should Know About Character, and I believe it came from his book. I don't think I can repeat it because I think it's got a curse word in it. But anyway, that's like the very first opening of the book is getting you into the mindset of what your character actually needs to have, which again, it's part of the important thing of figuring out what your character is. Then you have character concepting, choosing a name, which, you know, we don't often think how important choosing a name is. I can tell you right now, when I choose a name, I like to just throw syllables together and consonants and see how it fits. I have my go-to letters. Usually it's something with like my letter J, or it might be A's, B's, whatever. There's things that look nice. Then there's also the standard names. I think if you go through my entire library of stories, you'll probably find a lot of repeat names in there. And I think the reason is just because there's some names I like, but obviously I don't want to repeat them within the same stories. Although I have this joke where it came back from years ago when I was a teenager. There was I'm sure if you've known video games, you've heard of Final Fantasy. And there was a back when it was what they call Final Fantasy 6 now, but it was 3 for the Super Nintendo. There's 14 characters in that that you can rename in that game, and I used to like to make fun of the character name changes. And one of my friends that I was playing it with made this joke. It's like, it would be funny if you named them all Bob. And so I always thought it'd be interesting to have to see what could be done with a story called The 14 Bobs. And obviously you have to go by their last name, but it's kind of an interesting angle that it goes to shows the power of not just name, but like how important it is to make sure your readers can identify a name based, or the character based on the name. Even if they forget the name, they still need to know who the character is by the way they present themselves. But what's the thing about that in particular is it also covers why your name should be appropriate for the text, how you can actually ruin your story by having a name that doesn't fit the character, and just little things like that. So certainly that's important. And then they have one called Name Dropping, which I honestly already forgot what that's about, but it was, what was that one about? I think it's kind of in the same boat of what I just talked about. But then you have introducing your character, and that's all in the first part. And so every part that you're covering is going to essentially dig a little deeper into the character development. And I wouldn't call it a hand-holding session, because again, this is just based on chapters and articles. It's not an entire book on the same thing. It's an entire overview of the character creation process. But because it's in bite-sized chunks, because it makes it easier for you to follow along, I think it's an important book to have. And that was ultimately when I looked at the sample online to see if I even wanted it. I knew right away that this really needs to be the opening salvo of our character discussion. I probably should have done it before the ones on archetypes, but I had the archetypes at the time, and I knew that those are also pretty important for setting the stage. But honestly, I think you can probably roll them all together and still get the same effect of creating a strong character based on those elements. But anyway, The other parts are point of view, dialogue, which we're going to do its own book later on. Protagonist. So obviously, protagonists are important because you need to be able to. That's going to be who is your focus for the story. So your protagonist will need to be strong enough to carry the story. So they're going to cover some things like the hero and the common man. That's by Orson Scott Card, who wrote the Ender's Game series. If you're not familiar with him, although you should be familiar with Orson Scott Card, he's a bigger name in the industry than a lot of the people in here. From Zero to Hero, I like that one in particular. That's showing how you can take someone who's not worth following and make him interesting. How to challenge your protagonist and then relate to readers with a lead character. So that comes back to the overview that I was talking about, how the reader will only care about your book if they care about your main character and then the characters in the story that populate it. So that'll kind of give you an overview of how to get your character in a position where readers will want to follow along. And again, it's all overview. It's not really digging into the deep dive of character development, but it's still reminding you what you should look out for and ways in which you can make it work. So all that in just this little packed book here, even though it's not that little. It's, again, over 300 pages. Then you have the antagonist, which we're going to cover also in another book soon. Supporting characters. This one's interesting because it talks about the characters that are not your main characters, that just kind of walk in and out of the story, but how to make them useful and how to make them beneficial. I know for my superhero epic series, which I have to go back and update some more. I got a huge cast of characters in that one. It's probably most of my books. I don't like to throw in a lot of characters. I try to keep it. I get a lot of side characters that are walk-ons for like one scene and you never see them again. But as far as like my central characters, I don't like to try to juggle too many if I can help it. But when it comes to the epic, you kind of have a lot to remember and a lot of characters to have their own backstories and things. And so I think something like the supporting characters is a good section for that kind of design, because it's going to remind you not only how to keep track of your main characters, but how to make sure your supporting characters fit the story, but also have their own lives and have their own personalities, and the reader can certainly tell them apart and maybe even have their favorite. There was one example they talk about. If you've ever seen Beverly Hills Cop, I forget which one of the was it supporting. I think it was developing your supporting cast, maybe. One of these. Let me just make sure I'm telling you the right thing here. 109. It's got a handy table of contents here. Sorry, I know you guys love it when I go through and stop the video while you look through the book to see if I can validate what I'm about to tell you. But it's important for research that you are accurate in what you say. And I don't see it here, so maybe this is not the same place. Which makes this even more interesting for you to watch me not find my way. There's all waiting for Godot. How the whole story is people waiting for someone who doesn't show up. Well, okay, I don't remember exactly which article it was, but the story is about in Beverly Hills Cop, the character of Serge, played by or Serge, as I think he pronounced it, played by Bronson Pinchot, who later got a starring role in the sitcom The Perfect Strangers. The thing with that whole design is he embodied a character that was memorable who shouldn't have been memorable, but he created these two components that he brought together to make the character much more interesting than he could have been if he just had the one component each. And it was enough to get noticed. It was enough for people to take notice of him, but for him to get a job on a sitcom that lasted, I think, 9 years. Perfect Strangers went on for a long time. And that's the power of being able to actually develop a strong, even supporting character, much less a main character. And just these little tidbits that they tell you definitely helps you, I think about in terms of how to make your characters not just interesting but fitting for the story. Because that's the other thing is in Beverly Hills Cop, the character, he didn't need to be anything special because he was literally just delivering a piece of information, but it was the way he did it that was just like, it made the movie just so much better just for that one scene. And if you have characters that steal the scene, that's it really helps elevate the quality of your work. So that's where, like, even your supporting characters, you don't want to leave them behind. And so that's part 6. Part 7 is about conflict. Um, Part 8 is motivations and relationship. Again, that's where I struggle as a writer to communicate clearly, because these are things, again, when you're a writer, you have to go actively try to make other things happen in your life that are interesting, even if it's something like the journey of trying to go get my best taco. Go to either, I don't know where you're watching this from, but one of my favorite Tex-Mex places is called Tijuana Flats. I actually I was in college up in Orlando at UCF, and Tijuana Flats is headquartered, or at least the first store came out of that area. And so I've actually eaten at the original store, and actually my preferred, I think, was their second store, which is off of University Drive. If you're ever in the Orlando area, it's University Drive and Goldenrod. It's the intersection where I think it's the second store. But that's when I first discovered the restaurant, and we used to go there all the time with my friends and eat, and it's just a really great place. So I already know, like, that if I ever get hungry for Tex-Mex, that's where I'm going to probably go to get food. But if that's like my motivation, is my hunger and then also my drive for a particular type of food, like, that's the best I've got. And so to have to come up with really, really integral motivations, like my superhero story, he's a famous tennis star who is being targeted by a serial killer, essentially. And it turns out the killer is it's under a contract. He's trying to, but there's a whole neuroses going on with that. And the thing is, like, the authorities want to put him in witness protection, but how do you hide somebody who's famous? You can't. So this is where you find out that there's actually a place where the whole place is invisible. Like, it's not that you need witness protection. It's like you need a place where people can truly disappear. But the interesting hook of that is it's not just the people who need to get away from the criminals who go to this place, but the criminals themselves will go there because the police can't find them there either. So it brings in this interesting dynamic. But the motivation of survival, it's core in a lot of stories of thriller, action, adventure, and all of that. But the really big question is, why does this guy want to become a superhero? Well, that's the trick. Is he doesn't. He likes being a tennis player. He likes having that life. He likes being a professional sportsman, and that's all he really wants. And as a person who's not athletic, I'm not saying I can't play, but it's not ever been my journey or pursuit. I can't necessarily identify with his desire to succeed in the sports world, but I could succeed with a desire of succeeding in professional capacity. So as a writer, I don't want my books to suck. Now, do I want to be as good as Lee Child? That would be ideal, but that takes not just practice. It goes one step beyond. It goes into a willingness to do the hard work of research and organization, but knowing the character. And if I don't know my character, I can't pull that off. So motivations and relationships, that becomes an important part of developing the character. And so any help I can get in order to make that easier on me is welcome. And so that's one thing that this section here, part 8, it just goes into, again, it's very short. It's the 3 chapters, but it's the important reminder of how to look for those motivations, how to define them, and just the fact that they should have them. There's a book I still, to this day, it's I think I bought it in 2017, 2018. It was from a bookstore that no longer exists, at least not in my area. And I got my bookmark halfway through the book. Like, it's not a bad book. It's it's in a genre I like coming of age, and it's a coming of age book, and it's well written, meaning the language is very literate. It's a competent book for its style, for its way that the scenes play out and all of that. But my issue with it is that the characters are kind of exaggerated for it reminds me of a glorified episode of Friends if it were to take a tragic turn. And like that premise alone is really not that bad if you're into that, and if you like Friends, which I never really got into that show, but it's the kind of thing where it's the whole thing is based on the 5 characters that populate the book. And I even admit, like, the halfway point gets interesting because that's when something happens. That's where like the whole point of what I think the point of the story is about is it happens at the mid piece, and so I actually kind of want to continue, except that the section afterwards like 50 pages, and I'm like I let me temper that a little bit. But the idea is that I didn't really know what the story was, what the whole point of it was until about halfway through. And it's like, look, the characters, you want to make sure that they're fun, they're fleshed out, and I think this particular book, it does a great job fleshing out the characters. It doesn't mean I like the characters; that's a completely different story. But I do think that there's a couple that stand out. A couple others, I feel like they blend in the background. Like even when they're on screen, even when they're the viewpoint character, I don't know that I fully care, and that's not a good place to be. For a writer or a reader, is just kind of getting through just because you got to get to the parts where you know something will happen. But I don't know. I'm still halfway through. I bought it years ago. One of these days I might finish it. But you want your reader to actually care enough to want to finish it, preferably within a few weeks, if not a few days. But a few years is, you may as well be going back to the 18th century for that. But that one covers motivation realism, showing change in your characters and the romantic relationships. Then the last part is character arcs. So this is where you go through and you show how they've changed. So there's 5 chapters on that one. Again, just by a lot of the kind of the repeat authors here. But it's a full suite of beginnings and ends for your character development. And I think that for a foundation, Creating Characters book is an important one to have in your library. It's not, I don't think it's, as far as references go, I think what I like about it is you could go back and just pick up a random chapter if you feel like you're stuck and get a lot about it. And because it's from different authors, you're going to have different perspectives. It's not all the same person giving the same style, the same editing, same everything. And I think when you have the diversity of voices giving you their perspective on how to put things together, it does it does 2 things. It gives you the opportunity to get a broader picture of how people view characters, but it also gives you an opportunity to see what those authors are like. So if you do want to go check out any of their books, you can. And so the last thing is this book here does have a permission section at the very end, and the permissions tells you where all the sources came from. So any one of these articles can become basically an exploration of the book themselves. So if you have anything in here that you like, that you want to learn more about, you can always go to the back and then find the books that they're related to. And again, spoiler alert, a couple of the books I'm going to cover this season are actually in this list here. The fact that one I just covered, The Writer's Guide to Characterization, is in here. That's the romantic relationships from the motivation section. So anyway, so that's Creating Characters. Let me know if you have any questions. Next week we're going to be doing another character book. We have I think 4 character books we're doing, and then we're going to be doing a bunch of resources that'll help you make your characters stronger. And then I'm probably going to take a short interlude between because there's a couple books that I need to add to the queue before I can call the season complete that I think are really important for craft that I don't own. And I'm at the point where I don't want to keep delaying the season just to have all these books acquired. So there's a chance I may take a short break after the resources section just to get caught up on the other things. But plus there's other videos I want to record in the meantime, like how to do a paperback and all that. So, but continue to stay with us. We'll keep airing for another few weeks. And again, if you have questions, leave a comment. If you have a request for a book, I'll need something for season 3. Because I do have a pretty full list in mind for 3 already, but 3 is going to be a little more flexible. And so if you have ideas that you want me to cover, just let me know. And then, again, don't forget to like and subscribe, do all the things that YouTubers tell you to do, and follow the page. And check out my website. And regarding, I don't know if I mentioned this in the other videos yet, but my website may be delayed a little longer. I went and did an edit about a week ago, and something happened. Something serious glitched in my system, and literally half of my web pages disappeared, and I can't get them back. So the good news is I know what they are, and I think most of my content is already saved in other places. So it will be a matter of just copy pasting and putting them into the templates that already exist. But it's still me a lot of work I don't really want to do. So I've been delaying it a little bit just to get my head back into a stable place, because it really upset me. So that's a lot of work that just went away. And but it's basically, it's going to take a little longer now to get my website online. So some of my pre-recorded invitations to come check it out may be a little predated, but it's okay. It's going to be around eventually. So I do think you should still go on there, and if nothing else, subscribe to my newsletter. And the freebies aren't available yet. I'm still writing them, so they'll come later. If you subscribe now, the freebies will come later, but they will be good, I hope. And then the other thing is the Computer Nerd. I mentioned this in an earlier video, but the Computer Nerd has been revised, and I'm waiting to get my paperback version, my updated paperback, to make sure I still like how it looks. I'm probably going to do one more very small edit just to kind of clean things up, because right now I'm testing the paperback to make sure it looks nice. But I've decided that the standalone will be the official book for a while longer. If you're familiar with my articles or my other videos and things, I've been talking about the possibility of expanding the Computer Nerd into a series, which means rebranding the design of it. And so what I've been doing is I've been writing a lot of scenes that set up the events in the current book, and I was going to rebrand it as a new book and then give a new prequel, and just the whole, like, basically scrapping the original standalone and starting over from scratch while using the same story to base the second book. And it's a lot of complication, and I think for my psychology, I just needed to get at least the version that exists as it is now in a place where I'm happy with it, and where I think you'll be happy with it too. And I do believe it's at that stage now. I'm still going to get a little bit more feedback from a couple of my readers to just make sure that I'm not projecting, because again, you need editors too, and I haven't gotten editors. So I am doing a lot of this stuff on my own gumption, and that's dangerous. That's another little kind of bonus tip here, is if you're a new writer, you really need experts to help you along, because if you go off of your own thoughts, your own ideas, there's a good chance you're going to make a big blunder. And I know that. I have the experience to know that it's easy to mess it up. And even the book I'm trying to fix now, I think the idea I have for it is good, but it's good on a scene by scene level. My danger is I don't know if it's all going to come together. And so I'm really kind of hesitant to really promote that one, because I don't know if I'm going to get it into decent shape. It's one of those things where if I don't figure it out, like if I don't crack the code of what makes it worth reading, I don't know. I may just completely brush that one off into the archives. But which sometimes you have to do. Sometimes your story will never work, no matter what you do to it. Even if you like the scenes, they don't come together in a way that makes sense. Then you have to put it aside, because your readers won't get it. And that's the problem I'm having with the book that I can't finish. Like, it's a good story, I think there's one in there somewhere, but I can't find it. And you don't want that. Your characters can be good characters, but they have to be good characters that serve a good story. And that's the other thing, is when we spent all last season talking about structure. The structure only works when your characters are good, but the characters are only good when the structure works, so you have to put them together. But anyway, that's kind of a soapbox. But yeah, I have. If you guys want to check it out, by the time this airs, I think I should have everything should be good to go. Anyway, just for your information, it helps me out. Helps me pay my bills. If you all help me out. But anyway, that's all for today. And come back next week. We'll do our next video, and I'll see you next time. Thanks. Bye.